Past wounds that still control you. How to break the cycle. There are wounds that never bleed, yet they rule us like kings wearing invisible crowns. They don't shout, they whisper. And their whispers shape the way we walk, the tone in which we speak, the fears we hide behind calm faces. They live in silence and inside the pause before we trust, inside the hesitation before we love again. They are ghosts that write our story with hands we cannot see. We tell ourselves the past is over. We speak of pain as if it were an old address we moved away from. But one day, without warning, a single word, a glance, a smell, a song, and suddenly we are standing again in the room where the first wound began. That's when the illusion falls apart. We realize that time itself does not heal. It covers, it numbs, it distracts, but it does not transform. Truth does, and truth only comes when we dare to look again. I used to believe my past was a story written and closed, a dusty chapter folded neatly on a shelf in memory. But one day, during an ordinary conversation, someone said something trivial, a phrase that meant nothing to them, and my chest tightened as if an invisible hand had gripped my heart. It was not the mind that remembered. It was the body. It trembled like a faithful witness to something I had sworn to forget. That was the day I understood. The past had not finished with me. It was still alive, breathing under the surface, guiding decisions I thought were mine, shaping the way I saw love, and defining what I thought I deserved. Wounds of the soul are strange companions. They rarely cry in daylight, but they whisper in our dreams. They appear not as pain, but as patterns. How we avoid, how we cling, how we pretend not to care. They speak through habits and silence. They build walls around what was once tenderness, until the fortress becomes a cage. And yet we call it strength. We tell ourselves we've learned, when in truth we've only learned how to hide. One of the oldest wounds is abandonment. It doesn't always come from being left. Sometimes it's from being unseen. A moment when we reached for comfort and found emptiness instead. That silence taught us a cruel lesson. Depend on no one. And from that moment we built independence out of fear. We carried our solitude like a trophy, when it was really a shield. We learned to be self-sufficient, not because we wanted to, but because no one came when we cried. And so, without realizing it, we began to believe that needing love was weakness. But it isn't. It's the most human thing we carry. The wound of rejection comes next, that subtle poison that says, "You are not enough." It is quieter than pain, but far more enduring. It teaches us to perform, to smile when we're breaking, to seek approval instead of connection, to mold ourselves to please just so we won't be left behind again. And in doing so, we lose ourselves, slowly, quietly, politely, until we no longer know who we are when no one is watching. Then comes betrayal. The moment trust collapses. It doesn't just hurt, it changes the way we breathe. It teaches the soul to protect itself even from love. And so we promise, never again. But that vow becomes a cage made of our own words. We begin to doubt even what is pure. We start to fear tenderness, mistaking it for danger in disguise. Years pass and we think we have healed. But these wounds don't vanish. They adapt. They change form, hiding inside pride, silence, and "I'm fine." They wear the mask of maturity, but deep inside they are still running the show. And what's most painful is not that they distort how we see others. It's that they distort how we see God. We start to approach Him the same way we approach the people who hurt us, cautiously, defensively, with hope in one hand and suspicion in the other. We ask for miracles but prepare for disappointment. We pray with half a heart, because the other half is still guarding the door. I remember one night while praying, I caught myself talking to God as if He were just another person who might not stay. I was asking, but not trusting. And then it struck me. I was not praying to God. I was praying to the memory of those who failed me. That realization broke me open and began to heal me. Because only when you see the face of your wounds can you recognize how deeply they've hidden inside your faith. From that moment on, something within me began to tremble, not in fear, but in recognition. Every time an old pain resurfaced, I no longer ran. I stayed, I breathed, and I said softly, "You're here again, but this time I'm not alone." And slowly, what once felt like punishment began to feel like invitation, an opportunity to face the part of myself I had long abandoned. The first step toward healing is not forgetting the past, but facing it without hatred, naming it, bringing it into the light, because what you refuse to name rules you, and what is brought into the light loses power. There are wounds that closed your heart, but nothing touched by divine love remains broken forever. When the soul begins to believe this, the past starts to loosen its grip, not because it vanishes, but because you no longer fear to look at it. Healing doesn't begin in the present. It begins when you look back through new eyes, eyes that can finally see God's presence even in the shadows. A wounded soul does not need to forget. It needs meaning. It needs to understand that pain was never meant to define you, but to awaken you. For years, I thought my wounds were random accidents of life. I believed they were chapters to be skipped. But over time, I saw that each carried a message, a younger version of me waiting to be heard. That child, that adolescent, that silent adult, all still lived within, waiting for someone to say, "I see you, I understand." And that someone was never meant to be just another person. It was meant to be me, the healed version of me walking back into the fire to bring the others out. When I began to remember, the floodgates opened. Scenes returned like ghosts of light and shadow. A trembling child in a dark room, a teenager smiling while feeling invisible, an adult pretending nothing hurts. I used to hate those memories. Now I approach them like sacred ground, because in that space of memory, God whispered, "Do not run from your past. I am there too." That whisper changed everything. It transformed memory into revelation. The past was no longer an enemy. It was a classroom where love had been trying to teach. So I began to write. Not to relive the pain, but to give it language, to let it breathe after years of silence. And when I wrote, I felt as if I were opening windows in a house long sealed. Air entered, light entered, the soul began to breathe again. Through words, I discovered that wounds don't disappear, they transform. What was once weight became wisdom. What once bled now began to bloom. Each unhealed wound, I realized, becomes a pattern, a loop that repeats itself through new faces, new names, new years. If you were ignored, you learned to shout. If you were controlled, you learned to hide. If you were betrayed, you learned to distrust. And soon you are no longer reacting to life as it is, but to the echoes of what once was. Someone once told me, "You're defending yourself from something I didn't do." That sentence pierced me. They were right. I was responding not to the person before me, but to the ghost behind them. That day I understood. Healing means learning to stop fighting ghosts. It means seeing what is in front of you, not what your fear remembers. God doesn't bring the past back to torment you. He brings it back to free you from the chains of misunderstanding. You cannot walk into the future if you are still reacting to yesterday's shadows. And that is why He sometimes allows the ache to resurface, not as cruelty, but as mercy. Because every resurfaced pain is an invitation to meet yourself with new eyes. Some wounds are born of words, careless, sharp, thrown in anger like stones. You'll never be enough. You always fail. Words that echo long after they're spoken, planting seeds of doubt in the soil of the heart. We grow around those words, bending to their shape until we mistake their weight for our identity. Other wounds are born of absence. The hug that never came, the voice that never said, "I'm proud of you," the comfort that never arrived when you most needed it. That silence becomes a hollow that the soul tries to fill with everything, with people, with achievement, with noise. But none of it works because what's missing is not something, it's someone who sees you, someone who stays. That is where God enters, not as a judge, but as a father. He walks through the ruins of memory and does not ask, "Why did this happen?" He says, "I was there, and I am here still." It took me years to understand this truth. Most of the pain we carry is not born of cruelty, but of the absence of love. Wounded people wound others. Parents who gave what they could, but not what we needed. Friends who loved, but did not know how to stay. Lovers who promised forever, but left too soon. No one teaches us how to love without hurting. Only God teaches how to heal without blame. As I remembered, I saw flashes of my own story. A child trembling in loneliness, an adolescent pretending not to care, an adult silencing their own heart to survive. And I realized all of them still lived in me, waiting to be met with compassion instead of shame. That's when I felt it, a whisper in my spirit like soft rain. Do not run from your memories. I dwell in them. And for the first time, I dared to walk back through the corridors of my past, not to erase what happened, but to let God walk with me through it. Healing, I learned, is not forgetting. It's seeing the same scene from a different angle, through the eyes of love instead of fear. I began to pray differently, not take the pain away, but teach me what it means. And slowly, meaning came. Light began to seep into the cracks. There is a moment when you stop fighting your wounds and begin to listen to them. Each one carries a message, a truth about who you are and what you've misunderstood about love. Pain, when seen through God's eyes, is not an enemy, but a mirror, reflecting what still needs tenderness. Forgiveness begins there, not as a command, but as a quiet surrender. At first it feels impossible. How do you forgive the ones who never said sorry? The ones who don't even know what they did? But forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. It's the moment you stop asking the wound to give you justice, and instead ask God to give you peace. Forgiveness doesn't excuse, it releases. It's saying, "I will not let what broke me define me." It's opening your hands after years of clenching. And yes, it hurts. Because letting go means you no longer have the illusion of control, but it also means you are finally free. Some wounds dissolve with a single prayer. Others take years, layer by layer, tear by tear. Each time you think you're finished, another layer of the heart calls out, "Look here too." That's not failure, that's faithfulness. God doesn't rush the process. He moves like water over stone, slow, patient, certain. He doesn't erase memories, he transforms them. He turns them from prisons into teachers. He shows you that even in your deepest pain, he was present, collecting every tear not as evidence of suffering, but as seeds for future compassion. I learned that wounds don't vanish, they become languages. The more you forgive, the more fluently you speak mercy. The more you surrender, the more you understand what freedom really means. And forgiveness, true forgiveness, is not a single moment of holiness. It's a daily choosing to love more than you fear. It's waking up and whispering, "I release again." It's weeping, then standing. It's believing that grace is stronger than memory. Over time, forgiveness became less of an act and more of a rhythm, a breath that began to carry me. I discovered that to forgive others, I first had to forgive myself. For the silences I endured, for the boundaries I never drew, for believing I was unworthy of gentleness. We are often the last ones to receive our own compassion. We punish ourselves for not having known better, forgetting that we did what we could with the understanding we had at the time. And yet, the voice of God is never one of accusation. It is a whisper that says, "You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You only need to be honest." Honesty is the doorway through which healing enters. And when you begin to see yourself through the eyes of mercy, you stop dividing your story into villains and victims. You begin to see a soul in process, guided by hands you did not know were holding you. Forgiveness does not erase what happened. It transforms what it means. It rearranges the weight of memory until it no longer crushes you but steadies you. The same situations may come again, betrayal, loss, disappointment, but you will no longer meet them from the wound, only from the healed place. That is the miracle. That is where the cycle ends. For years I believed that healing would feel like forgetting, but it doesn't. Healing feels like remembering and no longer bleeding. One day you wake up and realize the past still lives inside you, but it speaks in a different language now. Not as fear, not as shame. It speaks as gratitude, a scar that glows instead of aches. At first, the calm feels strange, like silence after a long storm. You've been living on alert for so long that peace feels unnatural. But give it time. The soul must learn how to live without armor. Then come the small miracles, a conversation where you once would have hidden, and now you listen. A criticism that no longer burns, a memory that no longer brings tears. Each moment is a quiet resurrection. When God heals, He doesn't delete the story. He rewrites it with His presence between the lines. He takes the same memory and lets you see it with His eyes, the eyes of someone who never left you there. For years I prayed, Lord, take it away, make me forget. But He never erased it. He turned it gold. He taught me that holiness is not the absence of pain, but the transformation of it. He doesn't change the past. He changes its meaning, and meaning changes everything. When I looked back, I no longer saw tragedy. I saw formation. No longer punishment, but preparation. The moments that once broke me had quietly built me into someone capable of compassion. That's what grace does. It gathers your fragments and stitches them together with light. Sometimes I imagine it like a tapestry, threads of gold woven through the dark fabric of my story. Each thread a moment of surrender, a tear that didn't fall in vain. And when you look closely, you see that the pattern was never chaos. It was redemption in progress. That is what I call the language of scars. Scars that do not hide and they speak. They say, I survived. They say love was stronger. They say, God was here. And when you meet another person in pain, you no longer try to fix them. You listen. You understand. Because your scars have become translators of mercy. You can speak hope fluently now because you have lived every syllable of despair. I realized that what once disqualified me was now my calling. My story, the one I wanted to erase, had become my ministry. God never wastes a wound. He turns them into bridges between souls. And that is redemption. Not perfection, but purpose reborn. It happens quietly, not with a burst of light, not with angels descending, but in the stillness after years of struggle. A peace that feels like morning after a long, endless night. There comes a day when the past no longer drags its chains behind you. You look back, and the ache is gone. Not because you have forgotten, but because what was once wound has become witness. You begin to understand that the story was never meant to shame you. It was meant to awaken you. Every pain, every silence, every unanswered prayer was shaping you into someone capable of compassion. The child who cried, the adult who hid, the soul that broke. They all belong to the same becoming. Healing does not erase your history, it transfigures it. The tomb becomes a garden, the ashes become soil, and the soul, once terrified of its own depth, learns to dwell in peace within itself. There was a night when I prayed, Lord, why did you let it happen? And He answered not with explanations, but with presence. No words, just the unmistakable feeling of being held. And in that silence I understood. Redemption is not about rewriting the story. It's about realizing that God was in every line all along. He does not promise to remove our scars. He promises to fill them with meaning. He turns what once broke us into the very thing that connects us to others. Every scar becomes a doorway through which His light can pass. I began to see that my healing was never just for me. God restores us so that we may become instruments of restoration. He takes what once made us silent and turns it into a song for those still searching for hope. That is why pain is never wasted. Not one tear, not one night of confusion. Everything we give to Him becomes seed, and in time it blooms into empathy, into wisdom, into grace. There's a freedom that arrives after forgiveness, a kind of holy stillness. You no longer need answers. You no longer need to prove, defend, or hide. You simply live, from a heart no longer ruled by fear but guided by trust. That freedom is subtle but unmistakable. You notice it in the smallest things, in the way you breathe before speaking, in how gently you hold another's pain, in how calmly you let go of what once terrified you to lose. It's not the absence of suffering, it's the presence of peace within it. And then one evening, perhaps without realizing it, you whisper a prayer that sounds different from all the others. Thank you, Lord, not for taking it away, but for turning it into something holy. That is when you know the cycle has ended. The wound no longer commands, it serves. The story no longer traps, it teaches. You no longer walk as a survivor of pain, but as a witness of grace. The past still lives within you, but it no longer dictates your tomorrow. Its voice has changed. Now it says, "Look how far you have come. Look what love can do." You stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and begin to say, "Thank you for what it made of me." You no longer curse the cracks. You bless them, because through them the light entered, and through them it now shines. I have learned that healing is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new way of walking. Barefoot, unguarded, grateful. The same world, the same scars, but a new heart within them. And when you meet another soul still in pain, you no longer preach. You simply stay. You become the presence you once prayed for. You speak softly, because now you know that healing rarely comes through answers, but through being seen, being held, being loved. So I live differently now, not from urgency, but from trust. Not from fear, but from faith. Not from lack, but from abundance. Every morning I wake and remember, I am not what was done to me. I am what God has done within me. And that changes everything, because the wounds of the past no longer rule me. Grace does.